What if everything you believe is more than just a personal conviction? What if it shapes the very world you live in? In an era where technology and science answer questions that once seemed unanswerable, why do so many of us still cling to beliefs that defy logic and reason? The human mind is a powerful storyteller, weaving narratives that inspire, comfort, and sometimes control entire societies. But at what cost? Today, we embark on a journey into the heart of faith and belief, exploring how these ideas take root, why they endure, and what happens when faith overshadows reason. The answers may challenge your assumptions, but they will also reveal why. In the end, the power to shape our world lies not in the hands of gods or tradition, but in our own. Religious practices shape billions of lives across the globe, but what drives humans to engage in behaviors that often defy logic, endanger health, or demand extreme sacrifice? Behind every ritual lies a complex web of psychological mechanisms that reveal fundamental truths about human nature, social bonding, and our desperate search for meaning in an uncertain world. Consider the psychological power of sacred objects, from Buddhist prayer wheels to Christian relics to Hindu idols. When believers touch, kiss, or bow before these items, they're engaging in what psychologists call magical thinking, the belief that objects can hold supernatural properties. This isn't unique to religion. Humans naturally attribute special powers to items connected to significant people or events. The fascinating aspect is how this belief creates measurable physiological responses. Brain scans show that handling sacred objects activates the same neural pathways associated with safety and comfort. The statue of Mary that supposedly cries, the bone fragments of saints preserved in glass, these items serve as psychological anchors, providing believers with tangible connections to the intangible realm of faith. The practice of ritualistic suffering, from Filipino crucifixions to Hindu firewalking, reveals another compelling psychological mechanism. When humans endure controlled pain in religious contexts, their brains release massive amounts of endorphins, creating what researchers call ritual euphoria. This natural high reinforces the belief that suffering brings spiritual reward. This explains why self-flagellation persists across cultures for centuries. The pain becomes its own proof of devotion, creating a feedback loop where suffering validates faith and faith justifies suffering. The psychological payoff is so powerful that practitioners often describe these experiences as the most meaningful moments of their lives. Religious practices often involve group participation, tapping into our fundamental need for belonging. When individuals join collective rituals, whether it's speaking in tongues, participating in mass prayers, or engaging in synchronized movements, they experience what psychologists term collective effervescence. This shared emotional state creates powerful bonds and reinforces group identity. The pressure to conform within these groups is immense. Members who question practices risk social ostracism, loss of community support, and identity crisis. This explains why obviously harmful practices continue despite evidence of their dangers. The psychological cost of breaking from the group often outweighs the physical risks of participation. When confronted with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, religious practitioners often experience cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding conflicting ideas. Rather than abandon their beliefs, they typically engage in elaborate mental gymnastics to preserve them. Scientists may prove that weeping statues result from condensation, but believers will claim the condensation itself is miraculous. This psychological mechanism explains why beliefs persist despite overwhelming contradictory evidence. The more invested someone becomes in a belief system, through time, money, relationships, or identity, the harder it becomes to abandon, even when faced with clear proof of its falsity. Religious leaders wield enormous psychological influence through two powerful mechanisms: authority and social proof. When a respected religious figure endorses a practice, followers don't just see it as suggestion, they perceive it as divine command. This authority effect is so strong that people will engage in behaviors they would normally find abhorrent. Social proof amplifies this effect. when believers see others participating in extreme practices. It normalizes the behavior and validates their own participation. The more people involved, the more correct the practice appears, creating a psychological momentum that can override individual judgment. Many religious practices are sustained by sophisticated fear-based psychological systems. The concept of eternal punishment, spiritual contamination, or divine wrath creates what psychologists call existential anxiety, deep-seated fears about death, meaninglessness, and cosmic justice. Religious practices offer apparent solutions to these fears, creating psychological relief that reinforces participation. This fear-based motivation explains why people continue dangerous practices like refusing medical treatment or handling venomous snakes. The terror of spiritual consequences outweighs the fear of physical harm, demonstrating how psychological fears can override survival instincts. Many religious practices induce altered states of consciousness through repetitive actions. Sensory deprivation, hyperventilation, or psychoactive substances. These altered states create profound psychological experiences that participants interpret as divine encounters. The visions, voices, and mystical feelings during these episodes become powerful evidence for the validity of their beliefs. From Amazonian ayahuasca ceremonies to whirling dervish dances to prolonged meditation, these practices hack into our brain's natural capacity for altered consciousness. Creating experiences become so intense they reshape entire worldviews of individuals. Religious healing practices demonstrate the remarkable power of psychological expectation. When believers participate in healing rituals, their strong expectation of cure can trigger measurable physiological improvements, the religious version of the placebo effect. This real improvement reinforces belief in the practice's supernatural power, even though the mechanism is entirely psychological. This explains why some religious healing appears to work despite lacking any medical basis. The belief itself becomes the medicine, creating genuine improvements that validate the practice in the minds of participants. Religious practices, no matter how extreme or seemingly irrational, reveal fundamental aspects of human psychology. They show us how desperately we seek meaning, belonging, and transcendence. They demonstrate the power of belief to shape reality. The influence of social pressure on individual behavior and the lengths people will go to manage existential fear. Understanding these psychological mechanisms doesn't necessarily invalidate religious experience. It simply reveals the human needs that religion addresses. Whether we find these practices enlightening or troubling, they offer profound insights into the psychological forces that drive human behavior in our ongoing search for purpose in an uncertain cosmos. The most remarkable aspect isn't that these practices exist, but what they reveal about the extraordinary capacity of the human mind to create meaning, even in the face of suffering, uncertainty, and death. In studying religious behavior, we're really studying ourselves, our fears, hopes, and the incredible lengths we'll go to feel connected to something larger than our individual existence. However, the most troubling aspect of these beliefs is not their strangeness, but their resistance to criticism. They are defended fiercely, protected by law, and passed down to children as absolute truth. The real danger is not in the content of absurd beliefs, but in their demand for blind loyalty and immunity to evidence. Every absurd belief began as an idea, a story, an interpretation, but with time and power it hardens into dogma. Once a belief becomes sacred, it becomes untouchable, no matter how irrational. What is called faith in one era becomes folklore in the next. What is defended as divine truth today will be laughed at tomorrow. But while it lasts, it shapes real lives, real laws, and real suffering. The more we look at these beliefs honestly, without fear or inherited reverence, the easier it becomes to see them for what they are, because they are just stories. Science does not need faith, it needs evidence. And the evidence keeps pointing in one direction. We live in a universe governed by laws, not by will. Every supernatural claim tested under controlled conditions has failed. Prayer does not heal faster than chance. Blessings do not stop bullets. Holy water does not sterilize wounds. These are not opinions, they are observable outcomes. If a God truly existed, hiding would not be necessary. The need for faith implies absence, not presence. We do not have faith in gravity. We do not need faith to believe in electricity. We see their effects. Faith is only required when evidence is missing. And when something cannot be detected, tested, or observed, believing in it becomes a personal choice, not a conclusion drawn from reality. The idea of a higher power may have served a purpose in the past. It filled the gaps when we did not know how lightning worked or why plagues happened, but those gaps are shrinking. The more we understand the universe, the less room there is for gods, not because we are closing our minds, but because we are opening our eyes. What remains once the gods are gone is not despair, it is responsibility. It means we are the ones who must make life better, not by waiting for miracles, but by being the agents of change ourselves. It is easier to think someone else is in control, but it is more empowering to know that we are. The world does not need more faith, it needs more courage to face reality as it is without divine oversight. Life becomes even more precious, not less. It becomes urgent, not meaningless. And in that urgency we find a reason to care, to love, to protect, and to question. We do not need gods to do that, we only need to be human. As we return to the question that began our journey, what if everything you believe shapes the world you live in? We see that beliefs are more than just personal convictions. They are the invisible threads that weave evidence together, the fabric of society, influencing laws, shaping cultures, and guiding our actions. But the power of belief is not in its origins or its endurance. It is in our willingness to question, to reflect, and to choose with open eyes. In a world where science and reason continue to expand our understanding, the choice to believe blindly becomes less a virtue and more a risk. Yet the responsibility to shape a better world does not disappear when faith fades. It shifts to us, to our empathy, our curiosity, and our courage to act. The stories we tell ourselves matter. The choices we make matter even more. So as you reflect on the beliefs that guide your life, ask yourself, are they inherited or chosen? Are they open to change or set in stone? And most importantly, do they empower you to be the author of your own story and the architect of a world worth living in? The power of belief is real, but the power of choice is greater still. Choose wisely and remember, the future is not written by gods or tradition, but by us. Thank you for watching. This video explores some challenging ideas, and our goal is to encourage critical thinking. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we hold, and the world they shape. Share your perspective in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going, because together we can build a future driven not by dogma, but by curiosity, courage, and the willingness to question everything.